we have come into some recent Netflix Avatar the Last Airbender news. So, according to Discussing Avatar, we're going to see some changes to Toph. Her actress, Mia Chek, said that her version of Toph will be a bit older and slightly more feminine. No hate towards the actress, but there's a specific range of things the cast and crew can say about their show during interviews, including lines that are there to just grab attention and promote the show. On the other hand, this line has some mixed results. There was certainly a lot of recoiling in terror because of several arcs bungled by Netflix during the season 1 take. For example, during the Kyoshi Warriors episode of the first season, it somehow turned into a more sexist storyline than Sokka being overtly sexist in the original, which is saying a lot because this is where Suki thirsts for the random foreign boy. I know it's more complicated than that, but at the same time, optics, Netflix, optics. There's also how it's Yagoda who's the one who gets through to Paku, not Katara. I feel like Katara as a character is way more passive overall in the Netflix series, though I have to be fair to Katara. I attribute this to how Netflix's Avatar the Last Airbender series is far more passive by nature because of the dominance of exposition, which in turn makes the characters seemingly lack any sense of agency and the horrendous pacing of the episodes as a whole. You can have the characters say whatever you want, do whatever you want, but at the end of the day, if the overall narrative doesn't treat something as worth being afraid of, or worth following, or just letting moments settle, then this really isn't going to work out at all. It's just going to make everyone more passive, no matter how active they may seem. But back to Mia Chek's remarks for the character adjustments of Toph. All she really says is that she'll be slightly more feminine, and I'm not sure why everyone is jumping to it saying, oh, this is like the poison and completely defeats the point of Toph's character, when in reality, it really doesn't. Slightly more feminine could just be something that is so subtle that no one really cares or notices during airing, or it could mean something completely different. We don't exactly know what Mia meant by slightly more feminine. That's just too vague to draw any solid conclusions on. Older, I think it feels self explanatory. This is a live action production after all. With that comes a few challenges. For instance, characterization. You can point to a plethora of Disney Channel sitcoms and Nickelodeon sitcoms given the subject matter, where characterization becomes static despite the characters visibly aging on screen from season to season, and thus creates an uncanny valley effect, not helped by the flanderization that's probably kicked in because you're only writing this character's dialogue so many times. There's also the fact that this is a live action production. There are things that are acceptable and easy in an animated, semi episodic show that will not work in a live action serialized one. It doesn't really matter if the Netflix series somehow has way more airtime than, well, the original. What matters is the overall narrative. You can tell a lot of stories of the same type or of different types in the same amount of airtime. And Avatar's semi serialized nature helped it a lot because you can just take in the world. Here, the world feels more like a soundstage. And by nature, that has to be the case. This is a live action production. I don't think ostrich horses are real unless we decide to do some kind of strange Sith science. By nature, you're going to have to throw out all the visual humor, pun intended, because this is Toph we're dealing with. Toph is probably going to not have this type of humor as you see on your screen because it's way too much effort for a joke that they could be spending their cash on something different. Plus, it would probably also cut into the actual story time since, again, serialization. I feel like there is a pivot into the strengths of the actress, which, okay, fair enough. Every single performer will eventually leave their own imprint on their performance. That's sort of the definition of a performance. You don't get the same performance twice, ever, even from the same person. Now, a more feminine Toph isn't the end of the world. If Precure taught us anything, being feminine and beating the crap out of your enemies aren't mutually exclusive. I do feel like my concern tends to sit more on the group chemistry and how this will clash with Katara. Like I said, The Netflix series is weakest when it comes to group dynamics. It's weak because it wants to get from point A to point B to point C, and then back to point B, and then back to point A, and then just skips everywhere. It is so obsessed with compositing multiple episodes into one that you end up having all sorts of problems, and you never feel any time to breathe. And when you want to tell a story like Avatar, we've seen the story of Avatar before, not just from the original, but from other franchises as well. The idea of a messianic chosen one beating the big bad and restoring peace to the world isn't new. What makes Avatar good is because you like the characters. You cannot make Toph's dynamic with Katara passive, but it ultimately ends up being passive because they keep trying to cram more exposition into it, more lore. And that's a major problem. It's the same issue I had with Molly Hayes when she was adapted into the Runaways TV series. Molly is supposed to be the levity of the bunch. She's supposed to be the kitty kid among the angsty teenage cast because, well, everyone has their own angst. So when Runaways was adapted for television, Molly Hayes became Molly Hernandez and came with her own baggage as an orphan. When everyone in the cast has a ton of angst, turning the levity into angst does harm the drama. We humans are good at seeing differences, and we sometimes need a break from all the angst. That was the problem with season 1 of Runaways, besides, taking so long to run away, but that's a different discussion. So, you have a more passive Katara, by nature, because this whole show writes her more passively because of all the exposition. You can't have a passive Toph. By nature, she is supposed to be the character who pushes buttons and pushes limits. Katara is sort of the play it safe. Toph is supposed to be pushing those limits. When you have characters who have all their, essentially, agency sucked out of them, well, you have some problems with storytelling as a whole. Here's also another possibility that's probably the most realistic of everything. Mia is an actress. I say this because she acts. Really redundant, then you realize she could have just simply filmed a sequence akin to the Tales of Ba Sing Se episode and called that more feminine. It's possible it's a sequence she doesn't remember from the original series, and of course this is a 61 episode cartoon and could have just simply forgot. Let's be real here. Actors are like you and me. They can't all be super fans of everything, especially works they're adapting. They have bills to pay, schooling to do, assuming she's like 18 and probably in college or high school or whatever, and they're not going to remember every single detail with a deep and intense passion like you and I would. Hell, I've watched this show while it was airing and rewatched it a billion times, and even I forget things that happen. Anyways, here's what I expect will happen. Toph is still going to be Toph. And of course, I'm 100% sure that she's going to do something like act like a dainty girl, even as she is throwing boulders at you, because let's be honest, that is 100% in character for Toph to do. She is going to hit you with a giant rock, and then she is going to act weak and pathetic because she needs to be sarcastic and snarky. I personally don't believe there should be much fuss over Toph being more feminine because honestly that is so vague that could just be anything, and there are so many variables it's just not worth worrying about. I understand why people are concerned about it because Netflix did butcher Sokka's arc and bungled the handling of the Kyoshi warriors, but I still think the bigger enemy is the poor splicing of episodes and pacing since Season 1 failed to do that and thus harmed the characterization of just about everyone. While Season 2 is more serialized than Season 1, it's still 20 episodes and you still need to get through it because the focus is distributed everywhere. In a 61 episodic cartoon, having one bad episode, well, you can recover from that. That's like getting a paper cut. But in a Netflix show where you have 8 episodes or 9 episodes, missing on one of those is basically like breaking a hand. Those are just my thoughts. Please consider liking, subscribing, tipping the channel on Ko-fi. This is Cyril signing off.